Hey there, and welcome to the Sudo Show, brought to you by the Destination Linux Network. Join Brandon and I as we chat with Chris Psaltis, the CEO and co-founder of Mist.io. We talk about the Mist multi-cloud manager, cloud native, and how to balance your cloud dependencies. All that and more on the Sudo Show. Welcome to the Sudo Show, your home for all things enterprise open source. I'm Eric the IT guy, and I'm so excited you're joining us. You may remember back in episode 5, Brandon and I reviewed some of the most popular cloud management tools. One of those tools was Mist.io. From that episode, Brandon released a YouTube video on how to use Mist to deploy DigitalOcean resources. We actually reached out to Mist and started talking with their CEO and co-founder, Chris Psaltis. What follows is a conversation we had with him. Speaking of DigitalOcean, we are very proud to call them a sponsor of the Sudo Show. Head on over to do.co/DLN for a $100 credit. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. And wow, has DigitalOcean been doubling down on their app platform. The DigitalOcean app platform is a modern platform as a service that makes it incredibly easy to build, deploy, manage, and scale your apps. Every few weeks, there's a new feature announced. Just a couple of weeks ago, DigitalOcean announced that you can now deploy code from your GitLab.com repositories right into the managed app platform. All you have to do is point your project to your GitLab repo, pick a region, select a pricing plan, and go. Now you can publish code from GitHub, GitLab, and soon, Bitbucket. Check out the DigitalOcean app platform today by going to do.co/DLN. As a listener of the Sudo Show, you can get your own $100 credit to get started with all these amazing features. Thank you to DigitalOcean for being a sponsor of the Sudo Show and the entire Destination Linux Network. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Chris Psaltis, CEO and co-founder of Mist. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Chris, you and I started a dialogue shortly after I announced the Mist video. One of the things that stood out to Eric and I was how passionate you are about this technology and this space around hybrid cloud and cloud management. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've found your way into this part of the industry?
Oh yeah, it's a it's a long history. Like I try to make it short. I don't have a software engineering background. My background is in computer vision and machine learning. So I started from being a researcher where I was, developing algorithms for different projects here and there. At some point, an old friend found me and said, "Look, we're preparing this company with a couple of other people. How about you join us? We will be doing consulting mostly on open source software." And that's how my career in software engineering started. So we started this company. We were doing consulting, meaning pretty much end-to-end services from developing stuff or customizing things, maintaining them, training people, all that. And we focused 100% on open source. We were running infrastructure and web applications for customers around the world. We were a small team. We had servers running on AWS, on Colo, on bare metals. We started building this internal tool that was about helping us manage our infrastructure better. And that's how Mist was born, practically. It was an internal tool. But then, at some point we said, look, if we need that and we find it useful, maybe other people out there will find it useful as well. We started focusing more on the Mist product, let's say. In 2013, we went through an accelerator. Mozilla was running an accelerator back then out of the Mountain View office. So we traveled to Mountain View. We've spent several months there, and practically the second day we were in Mountain View, we decided this is it. We're stopping the consulting business. We will be focusing entirely to Mist.io, and that's a brief story.
That's awesome. What was that moment that you're like, okay, this is the gap we're going to solve? What was the gap you were trying to solve with Mist? In the open source land for cloud management tools, there's very few tools. There's Mist, there's ManageIQ, and maybe one or two others. in the proprietary land, I'm stumbling over them, and they're, what was the gap that you guys saw?
Yeah, first of all, as you said, the open source world didn't have many options. It was practically manage IQ or nothing. Manage IQ is a good solution, but it's rather complicated and hard to work with. It can be very powerful when you've spent like a lot of time working with it, but it's hard to get going out of the box. And inherently it has some premium support, let's say, for Red Hat platforms and Red Hat tooling and all that. It's not objective, let's say, into what it supports. So we wanted something that was, super simple to get started with, but also from a day two perspective. Again, you can imagine that we were a small team. We couldn't spend a lot of time on that. We couldn't get a set of certifications just to get started. So we wanted to bring this user friendliness to our end users, but also keep it as wide open as possible so it can be easily extended and it can support like a wide range of technologies without having some even indirect relation to a major vendor. And that was the idea. And we're practically still there. I mean, this philosophy hasn't changed much since the early days.
That's really amazing. And some of the best tools on the market, especially in the open source space, seem to come from someone finding a need that they have in their own business, whether it's consulting or whether they work full time at another company, and go, wow, wouldn't it be nice if we had this thing? And it's awesome to hear a story of someone who said, wow, it'd be nice to have this thing, to make that thing, and then to push it out into the public for people to use.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you are the first user,
right? Yeah.
If it doesn't work for you, why invest the time and effort to build it? And then on the other hand, if it works for you, chances are it will work for others as well.
Right, exactly. So you were in the Mozilla Accelerator program when you decided that Mist was the future. So what were kind of those next days like? What was it like going from being a consulting company to being a software engineer, basically?
It was a roller coaster, practically. So as I said, like in day two, we decided that this is what we are going to do. Then around day four, we started getting some feedback from people in the space, potential investors and others, like, oh, why do multi-cloud? Who will ever do multi-cloud? Today, everybody's on a data center or something like that. And tomorrow they will be on Amazon, on AWS, and that's it, period. Who would like to run more than two clouds at the same time? And we went through this situation several times. Nowadays, it's much more clear that multi-cloud is everywhere, practically. It was everywhere, even back in those days. But people weren't exactly recognizing it. They weren't exactly accepting it. Now this has become much more clear. Having organizations adopting multiple platforms at the same time is pretty much the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to be like a big strategic decision coming from the C-suite or anything like that. It just happens. And, it's better to manage it rather than try to avoid it.
Yeah, exactly. Because, large enterprises say sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and it's like the business could go to Azure and go deploy a bunch of VMs, whereas IT is all but standardized on like some sort of internal private cloud or AWS. And then they discover, oh, there's like $20,000 a month going on here in Azure, and we need to start getting that cost under control. And yeah, and the fact is that's what happens.
It happens, and it happens for a reason. It's not like there is like this term called Sudo IT. I think it's a very negative way to approach it. I mean, the people you mentioned who started an account on Azure, they did it for some reason. They didn't go to the company approved, let's say, platform for some reason. Maybe they were more familiar and more productive with Azure. Maybe they don't like the internal platform at all, or it cannot do what they are looking for. So these things happen, and instead of trying to stop people to do their job more efficiently, you just have to empower them to use whatever they're feeling more comfortable with, because in the end of the day, businesses and technologies are running with people and for people. You should take into account the human factor.
Well, and as technology has changed, so has culture. You talk about shadow IT, and I remember a few years ago being in IT operations and realizing that, wait, my team is part of the problem here. The reason why we have people using AWS and GCP instead of going through our internal process is, if I had to request a server through the internal process, I'd be furious, because it takes 3 days to get approvals. It takes 3 days to get the VM provisioned. It takes a week to get the database team to install the database. I mean, the list goes on. And then of course, security is always the last to know. So then the VM has to go over to security to get scanned. And by the time you're all said and done, you may have a development server that you wanted to test out an idea on, and it's taken you 6 weeks just to get the login.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I can just take my company card and I can go out to AWS, spin up a couple of EC2 clusters, spin them down, and I've spent 2 hours testing out this idea, and $6. But you multiply that by 500 people, all of a sudden you've got a major financial problem. So operations really needs to just reposition themselves as an enabler of development, as opposed to the kind of the keeper of the keys.
Exactly. That's very spot on, and we see it happening on daily basis. I mean, it's a very, very common situation.
So, Chris, Mist is mostly open source, and it's an open core. Is the project open to outside contributions? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. And we also have some of our customers contributing code from time to time. We do follow an open core model. The vast majority of the functionality is available under an Apache license. What we keep on the commercial side of things is practically a few things, mostly related, let's say, to enterprise features like role-based access controls, authentication with LDAP, Active Directory, things like that, where practically it means that, if you need those features, you're using Mist for some serious business. And even if those were not absolutely necessary, you would certainly need some level of support, maintenance, and all that. So that's how we segment, let's say, the product. In fact, there are 3 versions of Mist. There is Mist as a service. You just create an account, you log in, and that's it. Then we also have the Enterprise Edition, which is hosted on-prem. It's the commercial version. And then you also have the Community Edition, which you can just grab from GitHub and use it right away.
And that's definitely a growing model, and it seems to be pretty successful, because, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to focus all your time and energy on developing this product, but you kind of have to pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's hard to figure out what's the best solution, let's say, or the best alternative in how you monetize open source. And it greatly depends on the project. So we're continuously iterating on that, and we have changed things along the way. I don't know if we will change anything more in the near future, but yeah, it's tough to be successful and find the right recipe for your open source platform, product, or service, or whatever.
Well, I've been using Mist in my home lab to manage DigitalOcean and AWS and a few other cloud providers. I think when we were prepping for this, you teased that you'll be doing a new release. Like, what's the new? What does that look like? What new features are coming down the pipe for Mist?
Yeah. Okay. So the next release, will be version 4.4. This is not a major release. We will be doing some iterative, let's say, enhancements and bug fixes from here and there. We will improving the support for a couple of clouds, mostly Linode, Equinix Metal, and a couple of others. So we expect small changes from here and there because right after 4.4, we will be going directly to a major new release, version 5, which will bring a lot of changes, especially on the API level. So we will be revising pretty much totally our API. We're talking for a brand new API version. When we first designed the API, things were much different. So this is an overhaul that was in the works for some time. And together with the brand new API, we will be releasing a new CLI. The first version of the CLI will be available in version 4.4, so keep an eye out for it. But in version 5, it will have like the full functionality. Everything you can do from Mist's web interface, you will be able to do from the command line. It's a really nice and powerful interface. Similar to what you would expect, let's say, from kubectl or something like that.
That's awesome. I'm very much looking forward to seeing that.
I know that you're a big CLI fan, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
It sounds like I'll be doing a new video soon.
You can do it like black and white, just the sale.
Maybe I'll make it green.
All right.
So switching gears just a little bit, while we were prepping for this episode, you also teased a series of blog posts that you have in the works, centered around this concept of making informed decisions about cloud technologies. I know for sure that our audience comprises security engineers, systems administrators, developers, IT leadership, and this is something that faces a lot of our audience every single day. What clouds should we sign up for? How deep should we get into their services? It's so easy to just go out, believe the hype, sign up for a cloud platform because that's the quote go-to, even though it may not be right for your company's needs. So I think this blog series will be really helpful for a lot of our audience. And if I'm not mistaken, your first one is due out just about any day now. You mentioned the first one was this open versus closed clouds. You want to kind of share the overview of that blog post?
Yeah, sure. The market currently is, as you brought up, suffers from hype. Let's say this is partially triggered by the major vendors. But also it is fueled by other vendors in the space, together with a mild level of ignorance, let's say, from some people. We see a lot lately the concept of open clouds being pitched as an alternative to closed clouds. I don't really know what those terms mean, to be honest. It's more of a marketing and sales construct from some cloud providers to differentiate themselves from their competition. And because I believe it creates a lot of confusion from the user side, we try to dig deeper and deconstruct the whole idea of an open cloud and try to explain what this is really and what should users be careful about and what they should consider before they go all in somewhere or they adopt like a specific solution from a cloud provider.
So one of the things we've heard you say a number of times is this open versus closed discussion and how important that is when picking a cloud provider. But you don't necessarily see that as kind of a binary option, open or closed. You see it more as a spectrum. So in your mind, what does that spectrum really look like?
Yeah, it's certainly a spectrum. On one hand, let's take a theoretical example that doesn't really exist. You have something that's totally open, and then you also have something that's totally closed. The open versus closed is practically related to the cost of migrating off a specific service. Like 100% open would mean zero cost to migrate off. 100% closed would mean an endless amount of money to migrate off. So those two extremes don't really exist. And they don't exist in any type of technology, right? Even if we just focus on open source, like migrating from an open source tool to another open source tool, migration cost is never zero. It might be very little, but it's never zero. And then obviously, even on very closed and very hard platforms to migrate off, there's always a price tag. Worst case scenario, you will rebuild it from scratch. Do you want to do that? No, because it's very expensive. But theoretically, at least, it's possible. So you have to consider this openness parameter in the sense of a slider. How much open is it versus how closed is it? From there on, like from being an open cloud or a closed cloud or a closed service or an open service, you have, as the end user, you have to decide what's the best option for your need.
Well, one of the things that people have probably heard me talk about is application portability. And thankfully, that's been pretty easy thanks to Kubernetes and containers. And that kind of gets us to that open cloud. But one of the big problems with going to the public cloud is data portability, getting your data out. How does that factor into this open versus closed conversation?
That's very spot on. Okay, so with application portability, as you said, I don't think it's very easy. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it right now. And there is a million tools to achieve application portability. I'm sure you're familiar with most of them, but certainly it is part of being open. Making sure that applications can be easily moved here and there. This is also related with the underlying components. For example, if we're talking about some sort of open source technology that's running your application, then it's much simpler than some sort of proprietary application. Again, in the example of Kubernetes is really cool because it abstracts somewhat the infrastructure layer. So you could be running Kubernetes on top of AWS or on top of Azure and never have to worry about what happens with the underlying layers. You just spin up your containers here and there. But then there is somebody inside your organization who does worry about that. How do I spin up VMs here and there? So it's not perfect. It's much, much better than it used to be. Mm-hmm. But certainly, the application portability, it's much simpler. Then you also have tools like Terraform, Ansible, and all the previous generations of configuration management tools. So there are several options on how you could achieve that. Mm-hmm. But the data part is pretty much unsolved. And it depends on how much data you have, how much you're generating, where do you want to put them. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part here is that, although most of the clouds out there are talking about how open they are, they don't charge you for ingress pricing, but they always charge you for egress pricing. For egress, I don't think this is very honest, right? I don't charge you anything when you move in, but I do charge you when you move out. And depending on how big of an amount of data you need to move, that can be, from simple all the way to I'll ship my disks to AWS so they can write something there and they will ship them back, or they will bring me a truck full of data mm-hmm. or something crazy like that. Yeah. The three main aspects I think to it is, as you correctly pointed out, the application part, how easy it is to move it. Then the data part, how easy it is to process and move and use maybe even existing open data sets. And then the third part has to do with APIs, open standards and things like that, like making sure that there is an easy way to reach both my applications as well as my data and the underlying infrastructure. So these three, I think, are the main parameters that define how open or how closed a certain service is.
So cloud storage isn't like it was in the old days. When I first started as a sysadmin, the closest thing we had to cloud storage was offsite backups. You'd basically run all your backups on site, and then you'd copy those onto a heavily protected external drive, and then a truck would come up, once a day or once a week, and pick up all your disks and go stick it in a cave somewhere under lock and key. I mean, back when I started in the industry, that was as close to offsite or cloud backups as we had.
And it's pretty much the same today. Weird.
Right. Now I just send it to a URL with an API token or something. But it's funny how that's kind of still the same problem. Although it was much easier then to just say, hey, send me the drives XYZ and 1, 2, 3, and then I've got my data back. Now it's so much more difficult, which brings up a huge question, something that's fiercely debated in the industry, and that's this concept of vendor lock-in. In your opinion, is that a risk in today's culture, or is that just a hurdle to be overcome, or is that something to kind of relish in? You're embedded in this ecosystem, for better or worse. You're there, you're plugged in, everything's running. What's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, so this is a heavily debated issue, for sure, and it's a very complicated issue. I'd say it's like a superset of the open cloud discussion, and it's heavily overloaded. So does it exist? Yes, certainly. Vendor lock-in exists since the very beginning of time, I guess. There's vendor lock-in everywhere, from your the mobile device you're using to whatever. Like it's in cloud for sure. Cloud is not some sort of commodity. It's not like I'm buying grain from two providers at the same time to make sure that I don't run out of grain. Its cloud offering is different. So it cannot be treated as a commodity. And in that sense, there is also this vendor lock-in issue that's creeping in. Then, do you have to be afraid of vendor lock-in? Do you need to do something about it? Here is where things get more complicated, I think. What I propose would be a more sane approach to the issue would be, how do I manage my vendor lock-in? How big of a lock-in do I have? How big of a lock-in am I seeing in front of me by adopting service A? And am I comfortable with this level of lock-in or not? There are many cases where being locked in might make sense. Like you're like a small team, you have this idea, you need to be up and running with a prototype in no time. Then, instead of start bootstrapping database clusters and all that, you can just get like a database as a service. This is a big lock-in, let's say, situation. And you can also get, I don't know, authentication services, you name it. There are like 1,000 different services you can get. But then on the other hand, by being so locked in on a specific cloud platform, you are out to the market in a fraction of the time that you would be otherwise. But then as your company is growing and your needs are growing, you suddenly realize that 1 million queries on your database are costing you a fortune. This wasn't an issue when you were running 10 queries per month, but now that you're running 1 million per minute, it's a big problem. Designing your infrastructure and evolving it is an iterative process. In its phase of your project lifecycle, let's say, there might be different requirements around lock-in. So you have to be, first of all, business focused. What is the business need I'm trying to solve? And then, consider the alternatives and figure out how comfortable you're feeling with whatever level of lock-in. So, instead of being afraid of it and trying to avoid it for whatever reason, you should probably think a little bit better and justify your decisions in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like a startup, there's no way, especially in today's climate, like it's too easy to just go to AWS, get things going and be done. Get your product out the door. That makes the VCs happy. That makes other investors happy that you have your product out the door quickly. But larger organizations established, it just the hybrid approach or the multi just makes more sense, especially when we're talking about, like you mentioned, databases, like huge data sets. Does it make sense to live there when you're a Fortune 500 organization?
Today's call to action is brought to you by none other than Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and business organizations to store, share, and sync sensitive data. Just go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started today for free. With all the news lately about security breaches, we don't have to tell you the importance of having secure credentials. Bitwarden is so dedicated to their mission that they give you almost the entire product for free. However, if you want to ensure you get the best features out of your password manager, sign up for their premium plan. It only costs $10 per year and includes all kinds of great features like 2-factor authentication login with YubiKey, Vault Health reports, one-time password authenticators, and 1 gig of encrypted file storage. Great for storing recovery codes for your accounts. Many password managers severely limit the functionality of their applications until you pay their steep subscription costs, some of which can cost upwards of $40 a year. That's why Bitwarden is such a great deal. Get started for free by going to bitwarden.com/DLN, then upgrade for just $10 a year. Thank you to Bitwarden for sponsoring the Sudo Show and the entire Destination Linux network. Now back to the interview.
So, Chris, what would you say would be the skills that engineers and developers need to adopt, especially as they go through and make these choices for their organization? What are you seeing there around new skill sets?
I can think of at least 3 things that they will require. First of all, they will require some knowledge of their cloud provider, what is possible and how can be achieved. Knowing more about other cloud providers out there would be also really helpful, because we see offerings that are differentiated across providers. So in some cases, it might make sense to go with Google, for example. In some cases, it might make sense to go with Azure. In some cases, it might make sense to go with AWS. So knowing what's available out there will help you make more informed decisions. The other thing is know your applications and your data and your architecture. How can I leverage those offerings to make my application run better, or do something that it doesn't currently do? If you don't have this deep understanding of your own systems, you're practically lost. And then finally, keep your mind on the business goals. What I'm trying to achieve here for my team or for my end users or for my customers. So what resources do I have available? And how can I use those resources in an optimal way? Like, let me give you an example here. Again, with the Kubernetes story, this is an interesting one. Okay, I would like to run my application on top of Kubernetes. Do I go with the managed Kubernetes offering from, let's say, Google, or do I roll out my own cluster VMs somewhere? The end result for the user would be the same. They just get an endpoint and they spin up their containers there. But, managing a cluster is not the same as running a managed offering from Google or AWS or anything like that. In this case, you should consider, do I have the skills and time and money available that could help me manage my own cluster, or should I go with a managed solution from a vendor?
Mm-hmm.
It's critical to know your limits, let's say.
Yeah, and like I've had this debate with some of my customers, like whether they should use the managed Kubernetes services, say on AWS, versus using OpenShift. One of the things I immediately bring up is, do you want to string all the components that you need to actually make it work? Like it's the Kubernetes is managed, but what about the rest of the stuff that actually makes it work?
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like it's almost part of the growing process that you can start out using those services, but they don't scale cost-wise. So while it's nice to start out with a managed database, a managed API, scheduler, all of those different things, it doesn't sound like it scales very well from a cost perspective. So maybe as that startup grows, as that VC funding comes in, maybe it's a milestone approach of, well, we used a managed database for a while, but now we'll move that over and we'll host that ourselves on like an EC2 instance.
It's also a feature issue. It's not just a cost, the scaling of cost. It's also like, how do I scale in terms of features? And obviously, as you would expect, like the more customizations I might require, throw in this service mesh, or throw in that thing or the other thing. This is practically impossible with managed service. Maybe you don't need it, right? Or maybe you discover down the road that you need it. So why try to over optimize things right now, instead of doing it when you have the maturity and the better knowledge about what you need? Because I've seen an argument like, I need service mesh X, which doesn't work with ZKE, for example. So I create my own VMs and I run Kubernetes on top my own cluster. I manage everything myself. Okay, and how was your life with Service Mesh X? Oh, we haven't installed it yet. We haven't deployed it yet. Maybe like in 6 months from now, but I don't know yet. But like you went through all this trouble just to get Service Mesh X, but it was just some sort of like long-term need that defined what I'm going to do right now. So yeah, you have to keep those things in mind. It's obvious that a managed solution can't be as flexible as a self-hosted one. Whether you need this level of flexibility or not, I don't know. This is something that you need to answer. You need to weigh if you actually need it and if you have the skills to implement it.
Chris, it's been great having you on the show. I know Eric and I would love to have you join us again in a future episode. Maybe when Mist 5 drops, we can have you back. And
there you go.
In the meantime, if our audience wanted to find out more of you, where should they go?
First of all, they can visit our website at mist.io. They can find us with similar usernames on social media. On GitHub, our organization is Mist.io. Mist.io/MistCE is the community version of Mist, so you can grab it from there and use it.
Awesome. Yeah, Mist is a great tool, and it's one I highly recommend our audience get involved with. We'll of course have links to Chris's handles as well as Mist's in the show notes. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. This was a great conversation. It was great to finally talk to you, well, at least virtually. We'll have to have you on the show again real soon.
Yeah, we will probably have to wait for the in-person meeting, unless you plan to travel to Greece anytime soon. I don't know.
It's on my list.
Yeah, we'll have to have the Sudo show world tour when travel's normal again.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We love getting your feedback. Head on over to sudo.show/discuss. Each episode has its own thread for you to jump in, ask questions, and share your thoughts. If you would like more of Brandon and I, you can find it over at sudo.show and on social media at Sudo Show Podcast. Head over to sudo.show/swag to grab yourself a Sudo Show mug and hoodie to keep warm this winter. You can catch more awesome content over at our mothership, destinationlinux.network. Brandon, anywhere else you'd like to send folks?
You can follow me on Twitter at dbrandonjohnson or my website at open-tech.net.
And you can follow me at ITGuyEric or on itguyeric.com. Remember, the Sudo Show is your place for all things enterprise open source. Until next time. Wow. Got that out of my system. We're good to go. And you can follow me at ITGuyEric or at ITGuyEric. I almost made it through the end.